Good morning, boys and girls. Before I begin chapter 41, a few things I want to go over that have happened. Um, it appeared that Misha was the last person in the ghetto, the last person to leave Warsaw. But in actuality, there were almost 60,000 people still hiding from the Germans inside the ghetto walls. And Janina was thrown onto a train by one of the jackboots. And Yuri did shoot Misha in the head, or so we thought. Did he shoot him because he was a Nazi, or did he shoot him to save him from the horrors of Treblinka and the trains? We'll discuss Yuri more when we get to the end of the book. Still wondering, who was Yuri? Chapter 41. We left off. Misha is wandering down the train tracks looking for Janina. I came to a boy. He was throwing stones down the track. A black and white dog was with him. And when the dog saw me, it came running, and I was afraid. Side note, the only dogs he's ever dealt with are the jack dogs. But the dog wagged its tail and licked the crusty gash on my arm. "Who are you?" said the boy. He wore shoes and clothes, and he didn't have any boils on his skin. "Misha," I said, do you have any water?" The sun flashed off the steel rails. "Where is your ear?" the boy asked. "Back in Stavky Station." "Where are you going?" To the ovens." "What ovens?" "You know, where the trains go." "Why are you going to the ovens?" "Because that's where Janina is." "Do you know her?" He shook his head. "Do you know Yuri? Do you know Dr. Korchak? Do you have water?" "Can I touch your ear?" I said yes, and he reached up. I think he touched it, but I couldn't tell because I don't have an ear there anymore. He looked at me. "Are you a Jew?" "Yes." I pulled the armband from my pocket and I slipped it onto my good arm. "See?" "Yes." He disappeared into the woods with the dog, and he returned with a pan of water. And I drank it. I walked on for days and nights and days and nights. And I ate blackberries from thorny whips that reminded me of barbed wire. I pulled scallions from the earth. I drank water from ditches. And when I would bend to cup my hands in the water, the ringing would pulse in my eyes. The steel rails flashed in the sun. I shivered as if it was winter. Side note, he's really sick here right now. And he has fever, that's why he's shivering. And his mind is starting to wander. My wounded ear would not dry out, and I would wake up in the weeds, and I would wake up on the tracks, because he keeps passing out. The steel rails wobbled away from me like silvery snakes. In my mind, I was in many places, and I was not alone. Bufo was there. By the way, he's hallucinating now. Bufo was there, smiling and waiting for me, and I could smell the mint. The blue man was riding the merry-go-round to the tooling music. I saw bodies wrapped in newspaper floating above the sidewalks. I felt Yuri smack me in the head and call me stupid. I saw Himmler's car stop, and Himmler himself got out, and he marched right up to me and snapped his heels together and saluted me and said, "Hanukkah!" I saw the orphans, and they were marching down the tracks, led by Dr. Korchak. The orphans were marching and singing, and their shoes were all hitting the ground at once, like a great big parade, and the oven door opened, and into the oven they went, heads held high, marching and singing. And every day I could feel Mr. Milgram stroke my hair, and every day I heard Kuba laughing, and every day I looked for Janina, and every day she was not there. I was used to her constant presence, to her mimicking everything I did. I kept glancing around to see myself repeated by Janina. But it was just me. And one day when I opened my eyes by the tracks, a man was standing over me. Chapter 42. The man placed his foot on my chest. "You're a Jew," he said. "Yes," I answered, pointing to my armband. "See?" "What are you doing here?" the man said. "I'm following the train. Janina. I'm going to the ovens." "What ovens?" "The ovens for the Jews. I'm a filthy son of Abraham. They forgot me. Can you please take me to the ovens?" The man spit in the weeds. "I don't know what you're talking about. You make no sense. Are you insane?" That word was a new one to me. "I don't know. I'm stupid, I'm tiny, and I'm fast." He jerked me to my feet. "Tiny is right." He tore the armband away. "And what happened to your ear?" "Yuri did it. He tried to kill me, but he missed." "Come with me," he said. I took a step and I fell back to the ground. Side note, he passed out again. When I woke up, I was bouncing in a cart pulled by a donkey, and when it stopped, the man slung me over his shoulder and dumped me into a heap of hay in a barn. The farmer's wife came and gave me water and a carrot to eat. Side note, these are Polish people and they're hiding him. The farmer's wife came and gave me water and a carrot to eat. With water and rags, she cleaned my wounded ear, and then she tied a rag around my head that covered the ear and one eye. "Do you know Yuri?" I said to her. She tied another rag around my crusty arm. "Have you seen Janina?" She touched my forehead. "You are burning up, and you stink." The farmer's wife put me in a wooden tub, and she scrubbed me till I screamed. She brought me clothes. She burned my old ones, the ones with the shoe in the pocket. Janina's shoe is gone. The wife came every day and cleaned my ear and my arm, and she would feel my forehead, and she would give me water and carrots and boiled turnips. I would sleep in the hay, and I played with the mice in the barn. One of the mice was my favorite. I shared my turnips with it. I called it Janina. I taught it to run up and down my arm and stand on my head. Then a cat ate it. At this point, I think the shoe and the mouse, I think Jerry Spinelli is trying to tell us something. Because that shoe was symbolic of her rich and beautiful life. And that mouse was a symbol of her current situation. One day I woke up and the ringing in my ear was gone. I walked out of the barn and through the fields until I came to the tracks. A spot of white caught my eye. My armband. It was snagged on a thorn bush, and I stuffed it back into my pocket. I had been walking the tracks for a long time when the farmer found me, and he stopped me. "Where are you going?" "Going to the ovens." The farmer knocked me down with a swat of his hand, and I was back in the donkey cart with a rope around my neck. I was tied to a stable post in the barn, and I remembered Yuri's story about my beginnings of becoming a slave to farmers. Maybe the story wasn't made up after all. Maybe I was catching up with my life. After some days, the farmer's wife came to the barn and said, "You must not run away. There is a new law. All children must work on farms." Side note, she's trying to convince him to not try and run away. Then can I go to the ovens? Yes, after the lot is over, you can then. I slept in the barn. I ate in the barn. I worked in the barn. And when I wasn't working in the barn, I worked in the fields. I hauled rocks to the donkey cart. I picked bugs from the vegetables when I wasn't picking the bugs from myself. I learned to milk the cow, and one day the cow kicked me. I told the cow what happened to that cow in the ghetto. The farmer's wife, her name was Elżbieta. Elżbieta fed me with the pigs. The pig's toilet was my toilet. Every night I was tied to the stable post so I would not run away. Sometimes in the night, on the far side of the fields, I could hear the trains. I could hear the locomotives, and I could hear the clack of iron wheels. Many times I asked Elżbieta, the wife, "When will the law be over? When can I go to the ovens?" "Soon," she always said, "but you must not run away. If you do, the Nazis will burn down the farm and feed us to the pigs." Side note, partly true, if they get found hiding this Jewish boy, they will be killed. So I worked and worked and waited and talked. I talked with the donkey. I talked with the mice. I talked to anybody that would listen. And then one day, a man came in a horse and cart, and he said something to the farmer, and then he went away. And later I heard the farmer shouting in the house. That night, I was awakened by a voice. It was the farmer's wife's. "Run!" Side note, somebody has turned them in. The rope around my ankle was gone, and there was something under my shirt, against my skin. It was bread. I ran. There's a space here for passage of time. Fast forward, 1945. The war was over. I had been on that farm for 3 years. I was back to walking the tracks, to the ovens. And this time, I had company. Thousands of people were trudging the tracks, the roads, the fields. And no jackboots were guarding them. He's talking about the thousands of people walking the tracks, those who have survived the camps. There were carnivals and markets. They sprang up in the fields along the railroad, and they were gone by the next day. And people were selling things. "Shoes over here, shoes! I have cigarettes for sale, cigarettes! Apples over here, apples!" Anything. People were desperate. They were selling anything for money, anything for food. I saw a tent made from bed sheets, and a man was calling out, come in, come in, see Mr. Hitler. Come right in, only 50 zlotys. Zlotys are Polish money. I didn't even have 1 zloty. I waited until somebody was paying, and I slid myself under the bed sheet, and lying on the ground was a skeleton. Its bony feet had been stuffed into long black boots, and a steel helmet swallowed half the grinning skull. Another man called out, 10 zlotys, 10 zlotys, you won't believe your eyes. There was no tent, only a handkerchief. A customer paid, and the man stood in my way, so I couldn't see, and he lifted the handkerchief and let it fall. The customer wanted his money back. While the two fought on the ground, I lifted the handkerchief. It was something I had never seen. It was something Faraday said did not exist. It was something Mr. Milgram said was kind of like happy. It was an orange. The hucksters, the people who sold things and tried to get you your money, they fascinated me the most. I stood in front of them for hours as they ranted to the passing parades about the wonders that were under their tents and their handkerchiefs. They never stopped. They never ran out of words. And when I laid down in the weeds or a barn at night, I whispered into the dark, Come and look, you won't believe your eyes. I dreamed. I dreamed of jackboots trampling the earth. I dreamed of burning cows. I dreamed that the stone angel looked down on me and said, I am nobody. I walked the tracks. I walked the roads. I offered my services to farmers for food, or for a bed of straw in the barn. And when there was no work, I took my food from wherever I could find it or steal it. I drank my water from the bomb craters. I rode on trains, as did many others, the survivors. I rode on boxcars. I rode on cinder cars. I rode on tankers. I rode 1,000 trains, and none of them took me to Janina. None of those trains took me to a candy mountain. Somewhere along the way, I heard the story of Hansel and Gretel, and I knew the end of that story was not true. The witch does not die in the oven. One day, I found myself back in Warsaw, Poland. The bomb craters were gone. There was still rubble. Trucks and carts were hauling it away. I thought I heard a machine gun, and I ducked into a doorway. It was a jackhammer. They were rebuilding Warsaw. I saw people slumped in alleyways, but they weren't covered in newspaper. They were sleeping for real. I found the ghetto, and the wall was gone. I walked right in. I looked for our place on Niska Street. I couldn't find it. I couldn't find our house. I couldn't find our orphan's house. I couldn't find Oleg hanging from the lamppost. I couldn't find the rug we slept under. There was rubble, but there was nothing. Even the flies were gone. Side note, the remaining 60,000 Jews that were left behind in the ghetto rose up in 1943, and the Germans burnt the entire ghetto to the ground to flush them out. That's why most of the ghetto is gone. Well, when I was riding the trains, I heard about the revolt. I heard about those remaining Jews rising up. And until then, I thought I had been the last one out of the ghetto. I didn't know that 40,000 people were still in there. And in the following spring, as I was hauling the farmers' rocks, the Jews in the ghetto had turned on the jackboots with stolen guns and bottle bombs. But there were too many jackboots with their tanks and their flamethrowers. And within a month, the revolt was over by May, and the last people of the ghetto were herded to the trains, and the ghetto was no more. Standing in that silent dust of the ghetto, I now understood. I at last understood what Yuri had done for me, what he had saved me from. I understood that the real Yuri, the Yuri that I knew, he wasn't a Nazi. He wasn't the Yuri that the Nazis knew. And I smiled to think of him on the last day of the ghetto, once again, in his own clothes. I smiled thinking about him shaking his fist at the oncoming tanks into the ghetto, with his red hair flaring, invisible no more, and calling all the world's attention to himself. Side note, when the book is over, we will discuss who Yuri really was. He was not a Nazi. After I walked out of the ghetto that was no longer there, I wandered the streets of the city and I stole food. One day in a crowd on a sidewalk, I caught a whiff of mint. I stopped. I looked about. I ran back the other way, and I stared into faces. I sniffed, and there it was again, mint. And a man's mouth was working with a fleck of green on his lip. A gristly, bony, skinny man. He had white whiskers. His eyes were sunken. His clothes were ragged. He had bare feet, and his feet were so dirty I thought at first he was wearing socks. He had no club in his hand. He had no fat belly. Side note, Bufo also survived the camps. And I planted myself in front of him, and he stopped. Fat man! He didn't move. His eyes sagged down to me. And I tugged on his rags. Fat man! His eyes were dead. Fat man, it's me, Misha! Me and Janina, remember us? He just stared. He did not hear. Clearly, Bufo is suffering from PTSD, just like Misha is. And I shook him. Fat man, Bufo, remember you hate me. You wanted to kill me. Here I am, Bufo. Here I am. I took his hand and I put it on my head. Kill me. His hand slid off my head and flopped to the side. I punched him in his bony stomach. Fat man, look! I pulled from my pocket something I had been carrying all this time. It was the armband. It was once blue and white, and now it was mostly black from dirt. I rolled it up my sleeve. Look, fat man, I'm a Jew! You have to kill me, look! But he didn't look. He wouldn't look. He shuffled into me, almost knocking me down, and he shuffled away. I watched until he was lost in the crowd. I took off the armband, and I let it fall to the sidewalk. That's the end of chapter 43. And just to let you know, everything that Misha has experienced at the hands of the Nazis, he is actually suffering some serious PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. This is common among people who have survived wars and extreme forms of abuse. Some of the things that he has seen in his lifetime, his short lifetime, have actually caused him quite a few problems. He is not right in the head, just so you know. See you tomorrow.